awesome. We're all prepared.
We sound great. Look at us.
Yeah, guys. All right.
I'm scared I'm gonna lose my place.
I'm very scared I'm gonna like stumble.
And then
Later.
I
Thank
loved
you,
it.
Esther.
No, Esther,
my
you're a great
favorite.
You're
director.
great. We love you.
Love you,
You're my
Esther.
favorite boss.
We love you. Hey, 30 seconds.
Sorry. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
I know in the last 45. How do I sound from this distance?
please.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's Wednesday, December 14th. I'm Aram Salam.
And I'm Babette Stolk. The State Office for Cannabis in New York gave out its first 36 permits for weed shops, which has some people celebrating.
I would take a selfie with that officer with a joint in hand. It's more of a like, I made it moment. I'm okay moment.
With the World Cup coming to a close this week, Nepalese immigrants in New York City react to the controversy surrounding the use of migrant workers, many of them from Nepal, to build the stadium in Qatar.
And then a few years later, I heard that his dead body was being returned to the country, and that was all a shock to me.
Gay bars across the country are on edge after recent violent attacks, but that won't silence the pride felt from many.
I'm as gay as a $3 bill. Don't ever confuse me for heterosexual. It's an insult.
All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Churchill Dunwee. President Biden is hosting African leaders in the White House for the second day this week for the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. Today's discussion will focus on trade and investment in areas such as healthcare, infrastructure, energy, and agriculture. Today marks a decade since the deadly mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut honored the anniversary with a speech on the Senate floor.
I wish I could tell you that the memory of that day has dimmed, but the fact is, it is still raw and real for so many of us in Connecticut.
The massacre claimed the life of 20 first graders and 6 educators, sparking national conversations on mental health and gun regulations. The World Cup semifinals match between Morocco and France kicked off a few minutes ago in Qatar. Morocco is the first African and Arab nation to make it this far in the competition. The winner will go on to play Argentina in the World Cup final. Moments ago, the Federal Reserve did not increase interest rates at its 2-day policy meeting, which began on Tuesday. This comes as a surprise to the market as the forecast was half a percentage point. This is the 7th time this year the Fed have raised rates to combat inflation. The stock market, in response, is up at 0.6%. This is Churchill Dunwee, Columbia Radio News.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Daniel Shaler. 2 NYPD officers stand trial today, accused of driving into a crowd of New Yorkers protesting George Floyd's murder 2 years ago. It's one of over 300 complaints from the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, but it garnered particular attention after a video of the incident went viral. It is a departmental, not a criminal trial, so if the Civilian Complaint Review Board finds officers Daniel Alvarez and Andrei Samusev guilty, they could face a loss of vacation days or, at worst, termination. Following the death of Rikers inmate Edgardo Mejias this Sunday, new data shows the city's jails are the most deadly they have been in 25 years. As of this week, 19 people have died in custody since the start of the year. That's the highest rate since 1996 as a proportion of total inmates. In the wake of the death, the City Council held an oversight hearing yesterday about the future of Rikers Island. Mejias had been awaiting trial and sentencing since October. The Department of Correction has not specified how he died. The world-famous Juilliard School of Performing Arts is facing sexual misconduct allegations dating back to the 1990s. Former students have described the alleged misconduct as an open secret, but despite knowing about the complaints for at least 4 years, the school didn't appear to take significant action. Columbia News' own Sammy Sussman broke the story this Monday.
Classical music is such an insular scene, and so for so many women, there are continued fears that they're going to face some sort of repercussions. I'm really hopeful that this reporting gives them the confidence to speak to a reporter or to speak to someone with the power to change things, I think.
2 professors stand accused. One died in 2019, and the other remains a member of Juilliard's faculty. Now in weather news, there is a storm coming. New Yorkers can expect rain, heavy wind, and temperatures in the mid-30s over the next 2 days. According to the National Weather Service's NYC meteorologist Dominic Ramuni, a rain jacket would be helpful on Friday. So enjoy the rest of the sunshine today and get your waterproofs ready. You've been warned. The Fed increased interest rates by 0.5 percentage point. In other news, an enormous fire engulfed a police evidence warehouse in Red Hook yesterday morning. Department Chief Jeff Madry mourned the loss of e-bikes, motor vehicles, and, most importantly, biological evidence stretching back decades. For Columbia Radio News, Daniel Shaler.
From Columbia Radio News, this is Uptown Radio. I'm Aram Salam.
And I'm Babette Stolk. In New York City, Uber Eats, Grubhub, and DoorDash workers make an average of just $11 an hour. That prompted the city to pass a law last year to impose an hourly minimum wage for the 65,000 app-based delivery workers around the city. This month, the city is convening to decide on an amount. They have suggested a minimum wage of roughly $23 after a 2-year phase-in, but some workers argue that isn't enough. Others worry about its consequences. Ahead of the city's public hearings, Julie Goldenberg reports on the issue.
Sunday evening, and several delivery workers are standing outside the Five Guys on Broadway and 110th Street. They're looking at their phones, perched against their e-bikes and motorcycles. This is their hangout spot as they wait for the victorious ring of a new order. I meet Jaco Traveris and his cousin Fernando. They're Uber Eats delivery workers from the Bronx. Traveris tells me he makes about $20 an hour from deliveries. But surprisingly, some workers like Traveris are hesitant to back the city's $23 proposed wage. This is because right now, workers are free to log into the app whenever they want and choose which deliveries to accept. With a minimum wage, this flexibility is likely to be lost. In its place, the city and some workers believe would be a competitive scheme. The apps will prioritize workers who complete the most deliveries per hour, since their time generates the most revenue.
They're going to send mad deliveries, and we're going to have to take every single one of them.
Traveris anticipates being forced to take orders he would normally refuse because of travel distance and safety concerns about certain areas. For him, like many workers I spoke to, the flexibility of the job is more important than a minimum wage. He echoes the popular worry that workers who can't keep up, or who do this as part-time work, will lose their ability to make money on these apps. In fact, some workers say this is already happening. Juan Areda is a delivery worker with Grubhub and Relay, a delivery app that already pays an hourly wage. He's a part-time worker, and recently he's been unable to log into his app. He tells me he's been trying since 1 p.m. It's now 8:43 p.m. So far, no luck and no deliveries. He thinks this is because he's a casual worker. Some apps like Relay already operate by penalizing workers and barring them from the app if their time generates less revenue. This is exactly the action that some delivery workers suspect all apps will take once the minimum wage comes into effect. Areda and his colleagues discuss regularly via WhatsApp groups. They predict that worker cuts based on performance or even legal status are coming.
A lot of people from Relay work without papers. I don't want to get into those things, because I want to keep my application and keep working.
Abigail Ramos, a representative from the city, says they are working to protect undocumented workers by keeping their status as independent contractors instead of employees.
If you're an independent contractor, we don't really need to know your status. So that is a form of protection that I think we heard from the workers saying, we don't want that to be changed.
But she acknowledges that operational changes made by apps might limit platform access for certain workers, especially those like Areta, who work casual hours. Nonetheless, advocacy group Los Deliveristas Unidos are adamant that an even higher minimum wage is in workers' best interests. They're the advocacy group that worked with the city to push for a minimum wage in the first place. Gustavo H., a leader at Los Deliveristas Unidos, says a $5 increase in minimum wage is needed to offset bike maintenance costs and safety risks.
You affront assault, you affront accidents. The city proposed some numbers. It's good. But we want the city to adjust a little more.
Ramos agrees.
It's like a minimum, right? Like they're not asking for more to be luxurious. They're asking for just the ability to pay for what they need to be able to have these jobs.
The public hearing on December 16th might decisively sway the city one way or the other. But what is certain is that the stakes remain high for workers on both sides of the debate. Julie Goldenberg, Columbia Radio News.
As app-based delivery workers fight for higher pay, workers in another field are feeling the brunt of a possible economic downturn. The tech industry has already cut thousands of jobs, and many of New York's media companies are following suit. Companies including Vice, CNN, and Morning Brew have announced layoffs, while Politico's tech site, Protocol, has shut down altogether. The cause, they say, is due to a shrinking number of ad sales. Lindsay Chu has the story.
Meg Zukin is a former social media editor at Morning Brew. The layoffs took her completely by surprise.
I think my initial reaction was just honestly pure shock.
Zukin says she had read an early morning email from the CEO sent at 7:30 that morning. The email said that the company was laying off about 14% of its employees. It also said that the company was feeling the cuts in ad spending from their advertisers due to the economic downturn. Then a second email came, and Zukin found out that she was among those who were being laid off.
It was, I think, really shocking to read first thing in the morning, and I'm assuming a lot of people didn't read it until they woke up a bit later.
What was really shocking to Zukin was that, in the case of Morning Brew, it seemed like the company was scaling really quickly. She was only hired in June, and a number of positions were filled over the summer. She knows someone who was hired as late as September, then promptly laid off 2 months later.
So from my perspective, I thought it was definitely different than what, the hiring team had been doing.
Miklos Savari is the professor and faculty lead of the Media and Technology program at Columbia Business School. He says that it was no surprise that the media industry was being hit by declining ad spending.
Yes, ad spending is very closely related to the performance of the economy. So in a recession, advertising is coming down, and when there is a boom, advertising goes up. There is no mystery there. They are very, very closely connected.
Sarvari says that media companies that rely primarily on advertising are the hardest hit. Those that convince their audience to pay for subscriptions may weather the storms better.
That's essentially the killer model of media companies, and every media company is trying to introduce some sort of a subscription model with more or less success. But there is no doubt that the subscription model is superior.
But that's hard for startups that don't have big audiences yet. Savari suggests that media companies switch to at least a hybrid model as soon as they can. He says we already see it in streaming services, like with Netflix that now has a cheaper subscription supported by ads.
And that's precisely for that, is to attract the less willing, the segment that is willing to pay less.
And with over 400,000 people working in the tech and media industries here in the city, New Yorkers are gearing up for a tough winter. Lindsay Chu, Columbia Radio News.
This week, part-time faculty members returned to classrooms at the new school in Manhattan after a month-long strike. The employees, who are represented by the ACT United Auto Workers Union, successfully negotiated a salary increase after working for 4 years without one. Other universities are following their leads. The faculty at the University of California is in the midst of their own walkout. I spoke with Dr. Alan Hyde, a professor of law and Sidney Reitman scholar at Rutgers University, about labor unions for academic employees, and asked him what strikes like this one might mean for the future of the labor movement. How are employees in academia represented? Is it normally through unions, or how does it work?
Well, it's complicated legally because there's a difference between public sector and private sector, and public sector varies state by state. So states like California, New York, New Jersey, it's much easier for public sector workers to organize than it is in the South and the middle of the country. Private universities would fall under federal labor law, the National Labor Relations Act, which was interpreted years ago in the 70s by the Supreme Court to exclude professors on the theory that the typical professor, full-time tenured professor in a private sector university is a manager and can unionize only if university management wants it, which they never do.
This representation of workers within academia, is it similar to how labor unions work for other sectors, or is it different, or how does that work? Is it
it's more similar than one might hope. That is, if you're over the hurdle of being able to organize, if you are classed as an employee and not a manager, you form a union by having an election, petitioning the relevant state or federal board for an election, and the union wins certification. It's the exclusive representation of the employees in the bargaining unit. But union representation is normally focused just on things like wages, working conditions, hours, benefits, health care. In a strike like the New School strike or the ongoing strike at the University of California, those are exactly the issues that people are upset about. So unions are pretty well equipped to deal on things like that.
Do you think that it was so effective in the New School, and you're saying it's going to be effective in California as well? Do you think a wave of strikes will happen across the country?
It's entirely possible. This has been a very good year for labor, not just in the academic sector, but the Starbucks elections around the country, the very slight cracks in Amazon, that might be over or that might continue. Public approval of unions is the highest it's been. The federal government is behind unions in a way that they haven't been since Franklin Roosevelt. So it's been a very good year for labor, and we'll just have to see how much further it gets.
When there is a strike at a university, it also obviously affects the students. What do you think about the responsibility like the faculty has towards students who are affected by strikes like these?
Well, under the industrial relations model that we have, the students aren't in any different position than any customer of a business whose needs are disrupted by a strike.
That was Dr. Ellen Hyde, a professor of law at Rutgers University, whose work focuses on labor and employment law.
A month ago, the New York State Office for Cannabis Management greenlit the first recreational cannabis stores and promised they'd be open by the end of the year. And next up, we bring you 2 stories about how this new law affects both recreational cannabis stores and street dealers alike.
This Christmas, Santa's not the only one working on a deadline. Many recreational cannabis stores await the city's promised grand openings. The catch? Unlike wine, weed does not get better with age. So now, as almost $1 billion worth of New York's finest bud goes still, the race is on. Who's seeing green and who needs to chill out? Daniel Shaler reports.
Since recreational weed was legalized last March, the State Office for Cannabis Management, or OCM, has been constructing New York's weed market from the ground up. In April, they greenlit 200 farms to plant a bumper crop. Farms like family-owned Beak and Skiff in Syracuse.
We'll have our own warehouse filled with product ready to go.
Matt Huber runs the cannabis arm here, and he tells me the OCM promised legal shops would open by the end of the year. So, on Memorial Day, Beak and Skiff planted just about as much as they could. It's mid-December and the dispensaries aren't open. What's the hold-up? While farmers have been growing, the OCM has been dealing with unpermitted stores, unregulated products, and the essentially open secret that legal farms have been selling to illegal stores. All the growing pains of legalization.
Police have carried out a raid on a Brooklyn smoke shop accused of illegally
weed trucks that they say are tainted marijuana products.
And it looks like the permitting process was lost in the noise. Delays, disorganisation. One applicant who didn't want his name revealed told me dealing with the OCM was like pulling teeth. The OCM wouldn't comment.
Frustrating just from a cash flow standpoint, obviously.
Huber left a job on Wall Street to move home to Syracuse and get away from the stress of budgets and big bottom lines. Now he's sitting on $2.5 million of weed extract with nowhere to sell them.
Oh, extremely stressful.
Then, 3 weeks ago,
this is a monumental moment.
The OCM called a big meeting to vote at last on the first dispensary licenses.
It represents the last leg of the cannabis supply chain. The resolution carries. Thank you.
36 shops permitted. But the job's not done until stores actually open. Now those 36 have weeks to scramble for store space, establish supply lines, all the logistical stuff which takes any other business months. And they're the lucky ones. Another 900 applicants still haven't heard back. So while farms have been biting their fingernails since April, many would-be sellers are still in the dark. And it's been the wait of a lifetime.
How you doing, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Ramon Reyes.
Reyes has dealt in Washington Heights since he was a teenager. He was so excited when permitting began, he put in the very third application OCM received. Since then, he hasn't heard anything.
Now they kind of like have us in the waiting game.
Arrested 10 times, he's had enough of looking over his shoulder and plans to open his own legal dispensary, Happy Monkey. He talks about legislation as if it's a waking dream, a series of pinch-me moments. For him, the legal license is where it all becomes real.
Once we see that name on that paper saying you're a licensee, I think that's it. I think there's no stopping us from there.
He imagines the day when, after decades of feeling terrorized by police, he can stand in his own storefront window and see the cops who used to rush him on street corners.
I would take a selfie with that officer with a joint in hand. It's more of a like, I made it moment. I'm okay moment.
Delays, disorganisation, decades of trauma, it's all not over yet. Farmers like Huber are staring down the barrel of massive losses this harvest. Reyes is just one of hundreds of legacy dealers trying to go legal, but stuck in a confusing waiting list. Thankfully, these two have their own ways to deal with stress.
A nice can of THC cold brew coffee.
I need a moment, I need a blunt.
So, Huber and Reyes relax slightly differently, but they both know the best way to start the day.
My wake and bake.
It's a wake and bake.
Reyes knows his moment will come, even if it won't be in time for stocking stuffers. Daniel Shaler, Columbia News.
For street dealers, selling marijuana in New York City is nothing new. But since former Governor Andrew Cuomo legalized recreational sales of the drug, delis and smoke shops have also begun selling joints, edibles, and more under the table. With legal recreational dispensaries set to open in 2023, how will the city's existing cannabis industry change? Liz Foster reports.
Recreational dispensaries open the doors for almost anyone to purchase weed, as long as they're of age. While waiting for the state government to approve license applications, delis, smoke shops, and CBD stores have taken it upon themselves to sell cannabis products under the table. I asked Dr. Sylvia Martins, a professor in the Department of Epidemiology at Columbia, about this.
They're not yet legal, but because cannabis has been legalized in the state and it has taken a while for the state to issue those licenses, there are several dispensaries like throughout New York City and the state. Yeah.
Martins researches the impact of recreational cannabis laws. She explained that opening recreational dispensaries can sometimes lead to fewer people applying for medical marijuana cards. There are currently 40 medical marijuana dispensaries in New York State. Medical dispensaries offer THC products free of taxes for New York residents who have been approved by a physician for a state medical marijuana card.
Yeah, because then people don't need to go through the burden of seeing a medical provider, getting a medical card, being approved.
And medicinal marijuana comes with a higher price tag.
The price for buying recreational cannabis is lower than the price for buying medical cannabis. Yeah.
Dispensaries, delis, and smoke shops are all brick-and-mortar establishments. But what about the black market weed dealers operating on the street?
Now, you want to buy weed from your cornerman? Go ahead and go get it from your cornerman. I don't care. but people should have the option to be able to get a safe, clean product.
That's David Elliott. He's a member of the New Grow Center, a Westchester-based organization that he described as a cannabis resource hub. The center educates potential cannabis growers and aspiring business owners, teaching them the different skills required to make it in the industry. Elliott is a proponent of recreational dispensaries, believing that they offer cannabis users a safe and informed experience.
I don't see anything negative about having product that's been tested and passed by the standards that the health department is putting up.
Cannabis products sold at dispensaries are lab tested. Joint tubes, containers of flour, and more are labeled with analyses about their content. The goal is to keep consumers safe.
Does it have pesticides, heavy metals? Does it have mold or any microbial leftovers in the flour?
Access to safe products is perhaps the most important benefit of dispensaries. However, it's not all picture perfect. Some experts are examining the flaws of legal cannabis. Their primary concerns are the potential for increased use among minors, as well as the added risk of driving while under the influence of marijuana. More research is needed to fully understand the positive and negative impacts of recreational dispensaries.
I would say it's too complex to say this is good, this is bad.
Dispensaries are set to open by the end of the year, but considering that licenses are just the first step in a long line of paperwork, you'll probably be waiting until 2023. Liz Foster, Columbia Radio News.
It's not even officially winter, but a seasonal respiratory illness, much like COVID-19, is straining New York City hospitals. Emergency departments are treating a wave of children infected with respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV, that can lead to severe illness in some kids. The surge is already filling hospital beds and lengthening patient wait times, and as temperatures continue to drop, clinicians worry things will only get worse. Ilan Ireland reports from a hospital in Upper Manhattan.
New York Presbyterian Hospital is home to one of the city's busiest emergency departments, but the waiting room feels almost peaceful on a Sunday. Around 24 visitors sit hunched over smartphones, and the lone ambulance outside turns its siren on just long enough to back into an empty driveway. Nothing in the waiting room would suggest that the hospital is almost at capacity, but that's exactly what I learned from Taylor Blake. She's a resident physician in the pediatric intensive care unit, and she holds one virus responsible for the diminishing bed space.
Almost every admit that we get, it's like RSV, RSV, RSV. And even when we're giving a report, like change of shift report, the nurses, they'll be like, another RSV case or another RSV case.
RSV typically causes mild, cold-like symptoms in kids that don't require a hospital visit. But Blake and other clinicians say they've seen a worrisome spike in severe cases since early November. According to Blake, many parents have been reluctant to expose their children to germs during the pandemic. That's left kids vulnerable to other infectious diseases as COVID-19 restrictions are lifted.
When parents don't allow that, they don't allow their children to build an immune system, and you need that immune system to fight off infections like RSV.
Most children visiting New York Presbyterian for RSV infections are able to leave the same day, but they're spending hours in the emergency room before being discharged, contributing to longer wait times and taking up precious hospital beds. Casey Sho is a physician assistant at the hospital. She says a backed-up ER can have major consequences for other people seeking care.
Patients who come in and are really in respiratory distress or having a heart attack, there's not room for them.
Sho fears the ER could be overrun if RSV transmission remains high. She says her team lacks the manpower or equipment to care for this many children struggling to breathe.
We don't have enough monitors to monitor the oxygen saturation of these patients. So they could be tanking, they could be in the 80s, they could be in the 70s, and we just don't have the resources to monitor that.
The flood of sick kids at this and other local hospitals has state lawmakers sounding the alarm. During a weekend press conference, Senator Chuck Schumer said the federal government should be prepared to help New York's hospital system if RSV cases keep climbing.
Any hospital in New York says, we're short of doctors, we're short of nurses, we're short of respirators, we're short of beds, that they can come and supply those things immediately.
Schumer's words are a small comfort to Kristen Dressler, a registered nurse at New York Presbyterian. She says she and her colleagues aren't prepared to battle another respiratory illness so soon after COVID-19.
Unfortunately, I think everyone is working at, I don't want to say like a lower capacity, but most of the field is burnt out.
Dressler isn't banking on receiving federal assistance anytime soon. She says that despite the pandemic, politicians and hospital executives continue to take healthcare workers for granted.
The support isn't there from the people who aren't like at the bedside. So, and unfortunately, the people that will suffer from that are the patients and the people taking care of them.
With a possible COVID-19 surge looming on top of RSV, New York Presbyterian staff could be in for another tough winter. Elon Ireland, Columbia University.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us. This is Uptown Radio. I'm Babette Stolk.
And I'm Aram Salam. Why is the private Blue School closing? And how are people reacting to the new football stadium going up in Queens? These stories and more coming up. Since 2015, commuters around New York City have been paying $2.75 for the subway ride, but things could be changing. City officials are looking at ways to close the impending billion-dollar budget gap, and one way is by increasing the subway fare over the next 4 years. Under this new draft, riders might see a fare increase by next year, and by 2025, the fare could be over $3. I talked with Brendan O'Flaherty, professor of urban economics at Columbia University, and asked him about these potential changes, its economic impact, and just how soon commuters will experience the increase.
Couple months. Okay.
And it won't have much impact on the overall economy of New York. It will be bad for people who don't have a lot of money and are not covered by one of the special programs.
So the New York State Comptroller's Office told us they're currently not making pre-pandemic levels of fare revenue. And if they were to, they would need to increase the fare to $3.50. They didn't confirm such an increase was happening, but what do you make of that increase?
Oh, the calculation is stupid. The increase to $3.50 would be somewhat worse than the increase to $3. But it's one of the most stupid calculations I've ever heard of.
I wanted to ask you, how much of a role do you think inflation will play in the possibility of transit fare increases in a city like New York?
Yeah, I mean, inflation is part of it. I mean, their major expense are wages, and the folks who work for the subway have to eat, and then they have other expenses, some of which are probably caught up in supply chain issues, various kinds of mechanical equipment, and those sort of things. So the operation of the subway is at least 10% more expensive than it was pre-pandemic.
That sounds like a tough situation, the higher cost of operation and the decrease in ridership, but interesting. Do you think there's any other way to mitigate the decline in the MTA's revenue than by raising the subway fare?
There are millions of other and better ways. First of all, they should have different fares for peak and off-peak, which they can do given the technology without even putting exits. They know when people enter now, and they don't need any more hardware to do that. The other thing is that the value of real estate in Manhattan has increased considerably. That real estate is valuable because of the subway. We take the subway away, and that real estate is not worth anything anymore. They should deal with much of the deficit with land taxes because the value of what they are doing is going into the value of land, and the value of land in New York City has increased substantially.
I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
Have a great one. Bye.
That was Brendan O'Flaherty, professor of urban economics at Columbia University. There are 190,000 kids in the Bronx under age 10. For years, the Bronx was the only borough in New York City without a children's museum. That changed this month when the Bronx Children's Museum opened its doors to the public. Churchill Donwy reports from the opening.
The new Children's Museum building is a dream come true for Bronx parents like Bonnie Macy.
My heart was beating fast as we were walking in, like for real, like it sounds ridiculous, but it's so exciting that this is here in the Bronx.
Bonnie says she has been waiting for the museum to open for 10 years. That is since her 13-year-old son was 3. She's visiting the museum today with her 3-year-old daughter. Bonnie is more excited than her daughter to explore the exhibits.
This needs to be accessible to folks in our borough, you know, that the Bronx also has children and education and art and learning. And so kids need to know that we have that too. You know, that's not something that we need to leave where we live for, but we can have that here too.
Most children's museums start with a small facility and through sponsorships and donations grow. But when it was incorporated in 2009, the Bronx Children's Museum decided it would start from the community rather than immediately moving into a building. So, they transformed a school bus into a museum. They partnered with community organizations through special programming, after-school activities, and community events. It was a museum on wheels. But now, they have 9,000 square foot facility next to the Bronx Terminal Market. It had been under construction by the city since 2011, and now finally, it's listed in the museum. It features numerous exhibits that teach kids about the Bronx, its natural resources, and those who have contributed to its culture. This includes the Bronx Waterways in the Waterway exhibit, a 30-foot-long water table that flows through the Harlem River, the Bronx River, into Orchard Beach. Afterwards, they can go through the Woods exhibit, where they can learn about the animals and creatures of the Bronx and build their own beaver lodge. And what is the Bronx without a block party? The block exhibit replicates a neighborhood of the Bronx with casita, community garden, bodega, farm stand, vet clinic, and lots of music. Sonia Manzano played Maria on Sesame Street. She has a reading corner in the museum called Sonia's Corner. The area is dedicated to the famous Bronx Sonias, her and Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She thinks spaces like the museum are key to fueling children's imagination.
And so in order not to stifle their imaginations, they could come to a place like this. You could see them playing in the water, playing with all the objects that are there for their amusement. I mean, they go right to it.
So I asked the VIP attendees whom the place was made for, how are they liking their new museum?
It's having fun.
Did you build a dam?
I'm having fun.
You having fun?
Yeah.
All right, what part about this did you love so far? Clearly, playing at the Beaver Lodge was more exciting than talking to me. My interviewees ran away. Others did not even talk to me. Playtime is too sacred to be interrupted for questions. Natalie Woods, the arts and exhibit director for the museum, is happy that this has finally arrived after almost 12 years of planning and waiting for the building construction to be completed.
This is a space to celebrate the Bronx and to be proud of the Bronx. So we're very excited to have it and to give it to the children of the Bronx.
The museum will be open 3 days a week, and for a limited time, admission is free. Adults are also welcome to reconnect with your inner childhood.
And some sad parts.
What is a children's museum without story time? Churchill Donwy, Columbia Radio News.
Thousands of soccer-crazed fans have traveled to Qatar to watch the World Cup games in 7 newly built, state-of-the-art stadiums. But a slew of controversies, including poor labor conditions for the migrant workers who built those stadiums, have surrounded Qatar since it was picked to host the games. Many of those workers were from Nepal. Over 6,000 Nepali construction workers have died, and many more were injured. As a result, Many Nepalese soccer fans, including immigrants here in New York City, feel conflicted watching this year's games. Ahead of the finals this Sunday, Isak Hullert reports.
New York City is home to the second largest Nepalese population in the United States after Dallas, Texas. In Jackson Heights, Queens, one of the city's largest Nepalese clusters, soccer-mad residents are gathered around TV screens in Nepali restaurants, bars, and barbershops to watch the games. But underneath that excitement, Nepalese immigrants are mournful and acutely aware of what has happened to many of their fellow countrymen in Qatar. While his eyes were fixed to the TV showing Portugal versus Switzerland in his barbershop on Roosevelt Street, Umesh said,
It was pretty bad there, We always have bad feelings about the Qatar. So it is not a normal situation. Everybody feels very bad.
Dr. Ramu Karel, a U.S.-based physician who's currently in Nepal, lost his uncle in Qatar and decided to boycott this year's World Cup. In 2010, when studying abroad in India, Karel met his uncle, who told him he had found work in Qatar.
And then a few years later, I heard that his dead body was being returned to the country. My boycotting doesn't do much. It's just really to recognize the memories of my uncle and so many other Nepali people, really.
Karel, who frequently travels to the far western region of Nepal, an impoverished part of the country known for sending many workers to the Gulf countries, said he meets many people who've lost friends and family in Qatar or have returned home with severe work injuries.
I've met a lot of people over the years that have lost their family members, lost their, either come back sick from the country.
When it comes to righting the wrong of what happened in Qatar, some Nepalese immigrants view it as a futile endeavor.
They already died, they cannot come back, but at least the family has to get the compensation, the good compensation that, that the family can survive.
Nulu Pulama agreed.
What's going to do? We can do nothing. We just watching, complain, that's it. That's the way, because we can do nothing,
International organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have released reports detailing the labor conditions migrant workers have faced in Qatar and are urging FIFA and Qatar to take immediate and decisive action to prevent further abuses of migrant workers engaged in World Cup-related projects and services, and ensure that migrant workers and their families who have suffered are compensated. And with the final game on December 18th, Karel believes the fight for labor and human rights remain as important as ever.
There's, upcoming World Cups are happening where 2030 is in Saudi Arabia, right? Part of it is in Saudi Arabia, I believe. And there are a lot of migrant workers in that country as well, from Nepal and from, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, other African countries. So this issue will keep on coming up again and again. So unless, FIFA is really committed to protecting this human rights, it will not happen. So I really think it's a big step to prevent further atrocities.
I'm Isaac Hullert, reporting for Columbia Radio News.
Speaking of new soccer stadiums, the New York City Football Club just announced it's getting a brand new stadium in Queens. However, this new build is raising concerns for some in the neighborhood. Aram Salam reports.
Willets Point. It's a waterfront area in Queens, east of Citi Field, home of the Mets baseball team. Filled with struggling auto shops and junkyards, the plumes of smoke inspired the Valley of Ashes in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Now, the industrial wasteland is set to be turned into a soccer stadium. At a speech outlining his vision for the area last month, Mayor Eric Adams said,
"We are building 100% privately financed Major League Soccer Stadium, 100% privately financed."
Some superfans of the club, like Jordan Griffith, are excited by the prospect of finally having a home stadium of their own.
There have been multiple agreements in the past that didn't work out or were not approved. So it's been a really long journey. And for it to come together and actually, be happening is now such a dream for myself and all these fans that have been here for so long and support the team. And it's really, really exciting.
But the news does not inspire hope in every New Yorker. Some residents in the Willets Point area are skeptical. Tahir Farouk is an Uber driver. About 20 years ago, he moved to Flushing from Pakistan. He drives me around Queens and points out where he lives on Cherry Avenue and Bone Street, less than a mile and a half from what will be the new mega sports complex. When I asked him about the city's plan to put a soccer stadium in his backyard, he didn't look thrilled.
There's too much crowded, no. But I don't know what the government policy, if they make the things like that in the same area, I feel that it's much more worse for the people who live there,
The news doesn't just upset Farouk, who also told me he already struggles to find parking in that area. Advocates like Drew Brown from the Black Institute, a Black-led progressive policy think tank, oppose the plan, saying it will just contribute more noise pollution and raise the cost of living in the heavily immigrant and working-class area. They told me they would not sit by as they watched the 5,500 affordable housing units they were hoping to have built in Willets Point be slashed in half by the city's new plan for the 25,000-seat Stalker Stadium.
For us at the Black Institute, we're constantly wondering, why is it for us, in order for us to get affordable housing, why do we have to swallow all of these other things? Why do we have to get a hotel? Or why does it have to be a casino? Why do we need to get a soccer stadium?
Griffith, NYCFC superfan, tells me he didn't know about the controversy surrounding his beloved new stadium, but fans like him don't want to ruffle any feathers.
From everything I've gathered, the club has seemed to have done a really nice job, and the city itself, of making sure that this plan, this program, this entire, not just stadium, but the entire facility and all the housing and schools, all the things that are coming along with it. This is not just something that we get and celebrate and move on. It has to be done the right way.
Construction on the stadium will begin in 2023 and continue on an accelerated timeline. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Aram Salam. Over the last few months, gay bars across the U.S. have come under attack. A shooter in Colorado Springs opened fire on a popular LGBTQ nightclub just last month. And in Hell's Kitchen here in New York City, many gay bars have struggled with vandalism, drugging, robberies, and even murder. Amid all this turmoil, how are patrons of gay bars in New York's other historically gay neighborhood, Greenwich Village, feeling? Babette Stolk reports.
I'm in Greenwich Village, at Julius. The bar has a long history of fighting for gay rights, and on the 6th of December, just a week ago, the bar has become an historic landmark.
It's basically an extra layer of protection.
That is Tom Barnardin, who is known in Julius as the bar's historian. For people like him, this place has long been a safe space.
I'm as gay as a $3 bill. Don't ever confuse me for heterosexual. It's an insult.
He has been coming to the bar since the 70s, and for him, Julius is home. He's there
5 times a week. I live 5 blocks away, all right? I'm single. What good is sitting alone in your room?
With other gay bars and a queer community under attack, Julius has remained safe.
I feel very safe. There's good security staff here. I'm concerned like everybody else that you just never know. You just don't know. You just don't know. And it's almost painful to be even having this discussion.
In the bar, there's one security guard. He's checking IDs. Julius's manager, Nicholas Gabriellini, thinks that is enough to keep it safe.
We welcome everybody, and we try to make sure that everybody respects each other, and we don't tolerate any nonsense here.
But Julius isn't the only iconic bar in the West Village. Stonewall has been marked as historic 22 years ago. It's also become a tourist attraction. Compared to Julius, the bar has much fewer regulars. The first person I talked to in Stonewall, who didn't want to be interviewed, was straight. For many years, LGBTQ activists have talked about the importance of queer spaces staying, queer. With straight people infiltrating these spaces, the risk of inappropriate comments rises. Comments that Jazz Kino has received in heteronormative bars.
Let down a guy because I didn't feel like talking to him, and he was like, "You lesbian," and I was like, "Yeah, sure. What? So what?"
At Stonewall, she feels safe.
Just feel like I can be myself.
In Greenwich Village, the people I spoke to agree about straight people entering gay bars.
I don't mind it as long as you're not coming in here and giving people like very dirty looks or saying snide remarks. I have respect for whoever's there.
Back in Julius, Tom Barnardin, our bar historian, has some clear views.
Well. Straight people are okay. My parents were straight. I don't like it when young women will come in here having a bridal shower party, thinking it's cute and fun, to hang around with these gay boys. We don't like it. Get the fuck out of here.
As far as the attacks in Hell's Kitchen, no one I spoke to knew that they even happened.
Okay, yeah, I don't know about that, but that's awful.
And so in Greenwich Village, business goes on as usual.
And I want jalapeno pepper.
Babette Stolk, Columbia Radio News. One of New York City's most unusual private schools is about to close. It's called Blue School, and it was founded by 3 people you might not expect. Sam Lawton reports.
This is the sound of the school's 3 founders. Before they started the Blue School, they started the Blue Man Group. They've been performing with drums, paint, and black lights around the world since 1987. But when the original 3 settled down and had kids, they were disappointed with the options for education. So they made a school of their own using a teaching philosophy called Reggio Emilia. It originates in Italy and focuses on the pursuit of individual kids' interests.
We felt like there was something missing in culture when it came to schools.
Teacher Sophie Laird says her classes were hands-on, like the time her students created a to-scale model of the East River because they were interested in water.
And so they didn't really feel like they were learning. Their parents would say, "What did you learn at school today?" And they said, "Nothing, I just played."
The school's Blue Man roots were most apparent on special occasions, like the annual Glow Ball.
They would turn off all the lights, put up a bunch of black lights, and have all of these different sensory materials that would glow in the black light. They would have paint that they would paint their white shirts that was glow paint, and it was truly like a magical experience for these children, and honestly for the adults as well.
But now the school is closing. The problem started in 2018 when Blue School bought a new building and hired the Rockwell Design Group, known for their expensive architecture, to renovate it. They hope to compensate for the cost by doubling their student body in the years that followed. But the spending on a fancy building caused a rift with teachers who already felt they were underpaid. In 2019, the faculty began a unionization effort. The school's founders didn't return calls for comment, but teacher Karen Levenberg says the administration feared a teachers' union would necessitate salary bumps.
They were having financial issues, and they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to do it.
In April, teachers successfully formed the union, but the school refused to recognize it. But that's probably not the real reason the school is closing. Those lofty goals of doubling the student body never came to pass. COVID actually led to a decline in enrollment. With the school closing this summer, teachers are starting to eulogize what they had. Perhaps Katie Dolan most of all. She taught at Blue School for 8 years and then brought what she learned there to Bozeman, Montana. She started State of Play, which she describes as a children's museum on steroids. It even has a glow room for kids to use. State of Play is now a preschool, and she sees a bittersweet opportunity in the collapse of her former employer.
We have an idea to just approach the current head to come out with an 18-wheeler truck and just fill it up with all of Blue School's materials and have them all live on.
Now, parents are pushing her to expand. She has her sights set on adding a grade level each year. As for the Blue School, students are guaranteed placement at the Little Red Schoolhouse or Elizabeth Irwin High School. But in Katie's words, the Blue School isn't a place, it's a feeling. Sam Lawton, Columbia Radio News.
With the holiday season underway, many are finding comfort in the small things, spending time with loved ones, looking at holiday decor, and even baking. To encapsulate the holiday spirit, the Museum of the City of New York invited local bakers to represent their boroughs with gingerbread structures. But which borough will come out on top? Bianca Alvarez is here to take a bite into the first annual Gingerbread NYC, the Great Borough Bake Off.
Walking out of the elevator onto the 3rd floor of the museum, you can smell it already.
a gingerbread Staten Island Ferry, Brooklyn Brownstone, Manhattan's very own Flatiron Building, a Bronx neighborhood, and the Queens 7 train. Erica Fair, founder and owner of Sans Bakery, located in Queens, took home the Good Enough to Eat award.
The subway, the 7 train coming over is just like a huge symbol. The subway car I created out of gingerbread, but I painted it with silver dust, and then the piping of the doors and windows and stuff. It was the most insane thing I've ever done.
The 7 train was just one of the many structures Erica made. To follow suit with theme, Winter New York, her landscape included edible materials to create a realistic wintry Queens day.
Like coconut for the snow, made the Christmas trees out of gummy bear, and the Christmas lights are...
For some bakers like Erica, a professional setting is ideal. For home bakers, the foundation required tinkering with recipes, watching videos, and reading articles on do's and don'ts in their home kitchen. For hobby baker Ida Kreutzer, who represented Brooklyn with her classic brownstone, gingerbread was something completely new.
And I did a very small test bake just to see how it would behave, because the only thing really that's important is it going to hold the structure? Is it going to be too soft?
And after finalizing their bakes, the assembly took place at the museum. Hours after intensive work and putting every detail on there, her gingerbread brownstone held up perfectly. The 7 competing bakers then left their creations up for judgment.
It was just really, really cool to see everyone's expression of the borough. My personal preferences, I veer towards attention to detail versus just sheer size or decoration.
Joan and I, a semifinalist on NBC's Baking It, was one of 6 judges. Empathetic to the time and effort made by each baker, Jonah appreciated the playfulness of the competition.
The whole point of it was to be kind of a cozy blanket of a competition. It wasn't, cutthroat or anything like that. And then I would say the one that was most coveted was best overall.
So that coveted title he talked about? Well, it went home with Sherry Kozlowski from Astoria, Queens. Sherry, an amateur baker, is no stranger to competitions. With her display of the shops in her Astoria neighborhood, she wowed the judges.
It was completely transformed. It doesn't even look like gingerbread anymore. All the detailing to, graffiti on the walls, to gutter grates made out of pretzels, like very tiny details in all of the windows, the way they frosted the windows. To me, that was really, really impressive.
As museum visitors come and go and see all the winners, Jerry Gallagher, Chief Operating Officer at the museum, has one goal.
We just really hope that people come in and just connect to their boroughs, connect to their neighborhoods through gingerbread, and connect to their own childhoods.
You're in for a sweet treat as the exhibit at the museum is here until January 8th, and tickets are available in person and online. Bianca Alvarez, Columbia Radio News.
For some, the typewriter isn't the most obvious gift to give this holiday season. However, in recent years, this machine has an unlikely comeback, according to one typewriter store in Manhattan. Sales have skyrocketed in the last decades. As the store prepares for a busy holiday month, reporter Alyssa Castles tries to understand why this machine of Christmases past is finding its way back into our high-tech lives. Is it just nostalgia, or is it something deeper?
Gramercy Typewriter Company in Manhattan first opened its doors 90 years ago, in 1932, under the ownership of Abraham Schweitzer. Now Abraham's grandson, Jay Schweitzer, along with Jay's father, Paul, own the store.
It's a very quaint storefront, a lot of beautiful machines here in the store, a lot of old typewriter memorabilia, photos, artwork, and whatnot.
Jay says he's witnessed firsthand the renewed passion for typewriters. After the dawn of the computer and some years of slowness, the demand for this machine has bounced back, and it doesn't seem to be letting up.
In this world of modern technology, we're busier now than we've ever been. We are working 7 days and 7 nights every day of the year.
Though the month of December is particularly busy.
The typewriter certainly makes a very special gift for someone, and people may come across one that they've had in the family and have decided that wouldn't this be nice to get it fixed up and running again and presented to someone as a gift. So between the maintenance and the repairs we provide, along with sales of fully reconditioned typewriters, it makes for a busy month.
Michael Leslie is a frequent customer and owner of 10 typewriters. He's a writer and says he used to use computers but has happily made the switch back.
I hate the computer. I hate the digital world. I mean, to be fair, it is what it is, but it doesn't interest me.
And Michael isn't alone. With more and more people feeling the burnout from spending hours of their lives attached to their screens, some are turning to typewriters. Michael remembers witnessing a first-timer at the store.
She had this kind of glazed look, and she was turning around and she says, I'm just thinking, I just need to get off the internet. And it was like someone showing up at the methadone clinic, and saying, help me, I must stop.
Jay, the owner, says he's been seeing scenes like this happen more and more often.
We hear from many customers that they find it rather refreshing to sit at the typewriter and have a lot of focus and concentration without the countless distractions when sitting in front of a computer.
With a computer, you can go back and forth with speed, write a sentence and delete a sentence in a moment's time. But with a typewriter, you don't have that same luxury. It forces you to be intentional with your words. Slow down, open your mind, and really think.
I think the resurgence shows that even in this modern world, with all the advanced technology at our fingertips, people do need a break, and people do need to step back, slow it down, give more thought into what we're doing, and the typewriter is ready for you at any given time.
This is Alyssa Castles for Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio from Columbia Radio News. It's Wednesday, December 14th. I'm Aram Salam.
And I'm Babette Stolk. This time of year, Central Park's Strawberry Fields attracts tons of street musicians and tourists to give tribute to John Lennon, who died 42 years ago just this month.
They created the show at Strawberry Fields a decade ago, constantly rotating performers every hour, and they've kept it going since.
The annual Harlem Holiday Gospel Celebration is returning in person this month, but not without controversy.
Most gospel music persons are members of the LGBTQ community, and yet there's still that not in my church kind of thing, except for the musicians.
And famous Fifth Avenue is looking a little different this holiday season.
I'm standing in the middle of Fifth Avenue. On most days, this would be a crazy thing to do.
All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
This is Churchill Dodui, Columbia Radio News. As expected, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates by 0.5 percentage point. Our earlier broadcast had incorrectly reported that there was no increase. In a press conference, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell forecasted more hikes next year.
While maintaining a restrictive policy stance for some time.
After the news, the market sold off. It's currently down 0.75 percentage point. This is the 7th time this year the Fed has raised interest rates to combat inflation. The U.S. Postal Service announced yesterday that the late Congressman and civil rights leader Jerome Lewis will be honored with postage stamps in 2023. John Lewis passed away in 2020 after spending more than a decade in Congress advocating for civil rights issues and injustices. The stamp will feature a photograph of Lewis taken by Marco Grab for a 2013 issue of Time magazine. A woman and her son were killed in Louisiana after a massive storm hit the South yesterday. The National Weather Service warns of widespread storms across the country, with more than 50 million people under winter advisory in the Midwest. Much of the South still remains under tornado watch. And if you're paying attention to the World Cup, France now leads Morocco 1-10. Halftime of the World Cup is currently on. Stephen Twitch Boss, the DJ for Ellen DeGeneres' show and former cast member of the dance show So You Think You Can Dance, has died from apparent suicide. He was 40 years old. Twitch, as he is known by many of his fans, was known for his joyful dance move and enthusiastic personality. A report released by Airbnb on Tuesday confirmed race influenced the booking success rate of users. The finding comes from a project launched in 2020 by the company to uncover how people of color are experiencing Airbnb. This is Churchill Danui, Columbia Radio News.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Daniel Shaler. The administrative trial of NYPD officers Alvarez and Samusev continues. Both stand accused of driving into a crowd of protesters and, if found guilty, could face loss of vacation time or termination. For some human rights advocates, the punishment isn't enough. But a leaked memo from Police Commissioner Kishant Sool this afternoon shows the city's top cop plans to loosen disciplinary guidelines she described as manifestly unfair. Earlier this year, in another tribunal related to the George Floyd protests, an officer who removed a protester's face mask to pepper spray them was completely excused of excessive force, but docked 10 vacation days for failing to report the incident in a timely manner. The cause of a fire which destroyed much of a police evidence warehouse in Red Hook yesterday morning remains unknown.
Smoke billowed into the air above Brooklyn as far as the eye could see.
Several vehicles were destroyed, along with, more significantly, decades' worth of biological evidence. 140 firefighters were called to combat the blaze, 3 of whom suffered minor injuries. In sports, the New York Jets announced earlier today that they will be switching their backup quarterback ahead of a Sunday clash with the Detroit Lions. Zach Wilson was dropped from the team 3 weeks ago after an uninspiring loss to the Patriots, but he is back. Wilson's chances of game time are significantly higher after starting quarterback Mike White suffered a rib-crunching tackle last weekend. And at lunchtime today, the 9/11 Memorial Museum named Clifford Channon as its new director. Channon, a former journalist and author, has worked at the institution since 2005 and said he's excited to meet the growing demands of audiences. Lastly, for the first time since it opened in the 1800s, a gate to Central Park is being renamed. In honour of the Central Park 5, the city's Public Design Commission settled on the new name, the Gate of the Exonerated, at the start of this week. This is Daniel Shaler, Columbia Radio News.
And now, more music. The annual Harlem Holiday Gospel Celebration is coming up. It's back in person for the first time since COVID, and it's raucous, joyful, vibrant concerts. But below the surface, there is some tension. In recent years, there's been a debate about the Black Church's acceptance, or lack thereof, of its LGBTQ members. And gospel music singers are right at the center. Sarah Cutler reports.
Derek McQueen is a gospel singer and a pastor. He's also the Associate Director of Columbia University's Center on African American Religion, Sexual Politics, and Social Justice. He says there's a phenomenon in the church that few people are talking about, and it's been that way for a very long time.
Most gospel music persons are members of the LGBTQ community, and yet there's still that not in my church kind of thing, except for the musicians.
Some say this unofficial don't ask, don't tell policy is especially unfair to the gay musicians whose popular gospel choirs bring in money for their churches, help expand congregations, and raise pastors' profiles. But perhaps the silence is coming to an end. Increasingly, scholars and gospel music singers are drawing attention to the LGBTQ community members in their midst. In a lecture on this year's National Coming Out Day, Northwestern University's E. Patrick Johnson, professor of Performance Studies and African American Studies, highlighted the previously unknown story of James Cleveland, a famous gospel singer from the 1950s and 60s, whose sexuality defied people's expectations at the time.
Because he wasn't, a stereotypical effeminate man, but he was in fact gay.
The Northwestern event paid tribute to the LGBTQ contributions to gospel music. At the event, Johnson said that growing up, the church was a place where he could safely express his queerness in covert ways. But he also struggled, he said, having to sit through fire and brimstone sermons about homosexuality being an abomination. People used to stay at one church for most of their lives, but this tension is pushing some to seek out more accepting spaces.
A lot of that is shifting. People are finding the autonomy to say, well, maybe I don't like what they believe. Maybe I don't like how they deal with LGBTQIA. And people are taking that autonomy and taking it elsewhere.
Some are taking it to churches that are part of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, like Rivers of Living Water on the Upper West Side. Founded by Bishop Yvette Flunder of California, the Nationwide Fellowship is an organization of mostly African American pastors and churches that openly welcome lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender members. On a panel last year, Flunder described the mindset she's trying to fight.
If you are not miserable, and if you are having flights of fancy or engaging in something that everybody else doesn't approve of, the only way to get you under control is to send you to hell.
To combat this mindset, Flunder, who is gay and an award-winning gospel music artist, tries to create an accepting space for those who have been marginalized. Even in times when the community is at a crossroads, McQueen says, gospel music can be cathartic.
There's a liberation of a way of emoting within a song that many of us would be embarrassed to do on a regular basis. And it all stems from, a lot of the oppression that happened in communities with African Americans. My Aunt Dot, she was a domestic for a judge in Morristown, New Jersey, but she was the queen in church on Sunday.
McQueen said gospel music is nothing if not resilient. If you want to see what it's all about, the biggest concerts of this year's celebration in Harlem are on December 23rd and 24th. Sarah Cutler, Columbia Radio News.
One of the most iconic stretches of downtown Manhattan looks a little different this holiday season. For the last 2 Sundays, famous Fifth Avenue has been closed to vehicles from 48th to 57th Street. The city has experimented with opening streets to pedestrians more and more since the start of the pandemic, but this is the most major stretch of road to join the party. As merrymakers flock to Fifth Avenue to celebrate the season, drivers brace for the gridlock they expect to follow. Is that just Grinchy talk, or is it likely to happen? Jia Yu Liang reports.
I'm standing in the middle of Fifth Avenue. On most days, this would be a crazy thing to do, but on Sundays in December, this is the thing to do. For the first time in most people's living memory, this major traffic artery has been closed to cars. Mayor Eric Adams said it would make the holiday season safer and more enjoyable. I'm here with Nicholas Belston, a tourist eating a Belgian waffle.
It's nice having all of the food trucks and little stands set up on the street, and you can just kind of walk on the street rather than being stuck on the sidewalk.
We take in the sights from the middle of Fifth Avenue. Twinkling lights stretch across the storefronts, colorful mannequins stand in window displays, and tinsel sculptures line the avenue. But even without cars, the place is packed.
The street is already crowded with people walking around. You can imagine how much more crowded it would be if everyone was only on the sidewalk instead of on the street, too.
Dr. Sharon D., a transportation engineer, says this is likely because the street closure inspired more people to come see Fifth Avenue. Even Dee, who usually avoids crowds and has never been to Fifth Avenue for the holidays, was more willing to go after hearing it would be closed to cars this year.
Yeah, so after you told me, I will definitely give a try.
While critics of the Fifth Avenue closure are mostly worried about the traffic implications, Dee isn't so sure that those fears will materialize. That's because of something called the brace paradox, the idea that adding roads actually slows overall traffic flow. It's counterintuitive, but well observed. Dee says it's too soon to say whether that will be the case here, but she reckons there's a chance that this could have a positive effect in the end.
You never know, maybe some people discover some side streets that they are okay with.
When Fifth Avenue is open, drivers usually aren't motivated to explore other options, so the closure might ease overall traffic by inspiring new routes that go around Fifth Avenue. On Sunday, the cross streets are kept open, and traffic cops stand on each street corner to periodically let traffic through. At one point, an ambulance comes through. But surprisingly, Dee says that open streets aren't really about the cars at all.
They are not thinking about systematic impact to traffic. Their goal is to ensure pedestrian safety and attract more pedestrians for the shopping.
Proof of that can be found on Fifth Avenue. People are lined up outside Lego, Cartier, and Tiffany's, sometimes wrapping around the block. Business definitely looks like it's booming. Dee adds that the crowds are likely bigger for 2 reasons: the open street and post-pandemic restlessness.
This year will be also a little different, right? Because after COVID, so it's a big event. I think everyone will go.
For the most part, Dee says open streets tend to be self-contained events. The cars go elsewhere, the people come to shop, then things revert back to the way they were before. Whether Fifth Avenue will have any long-term impacts, only time and data will tell. If you're interested in seeing the spectacle, the final closure will be this Sunday. Jiayu Liang, Columbia Radio News. The month of December marks an important time at Central Park Strawberry Fields,
where street musicians come to play Beatles music and tourists commemorate the death of John Lennon. But while the tourists relax and enjoy songs about peace, love, and harmony, things among the musicians are less harmonious. This has spurred one man to set up a whole apparatus to keep fighting between the musicians at bay, as best he can. Esta Kong still has the story.
Nearly every daylight hour, there's some musician at Strawberry Fields playing a song like this. Or this.
Oh, I believe yesterday.
The unofficial sheriff of this place is Dave Muniz, though he hates that nickname. About a decade ago, Muniz arrived here and saw chaos. Musicians were knocking each other over to play here. And there was actual money to be made, $600 a day if you were the one playing in this prime spot. I wanted to ask Muniz about his system, but things had been tense lately and he was reluctant to talk to me.
I don't want to do an interview with you. Stay away from me. I'm the guy that runs the show.
He came around eventually, and he told me that when he arrived at Strawberry Fields, it was a very different place, in a very different New York.
Every 2 weeks, they'd pull a body out of the woods from heroin. People were ODing in the woods. It was really bad. It was really bad. So that's how people got to know who I was.
This was around 2013, and the musicians were constantly toppling each other over who got to play there. This was bad for business, Muniz says.
So the whole place was in chaos. When I walked in, there was two guys getting ready to fight, two musicians.
With drama in the park and musicians fighting for a spot, Muniz came up with a solution. A schedule that every musician would keep to. This is Jeff, another guy who plays here, explaining it to his audience.
They created the show at Strawberry Fields a decade ago, constantly rotating performers every hour. And they've kept it going since.
Muniz texts the schedule out every morning. Stray from it, and he will be there in a split second to restore order. And even though December is the busiest time of year at Strawberry Fields, it actually runs smoothly. These guys are trying to give peace a chance. But not everyone likes it. Here's Sean Yox, another regular at Strawberry Fields.
You know, now we have schedules, so it's like if you miss your hour, then you're in trouble. If you live from music, then if I miss this hour here, then I'm in trouble, and I don't know how I'm going to make money today.
It felt freer back in the day, Yox says.
You know, yeah, it was a little bit different. It was much more space to play.
In many ways, he's right. What Muniz has created is not a democracy. He decides who gets to play and when, sheriff style. But Muniz did actually try to leave it up to the others a couple of years ago, he says.
I left, and when I came back, I got yelled at by everybody. Well, why didn't you keep doing it? Why didn't you keep doing it?
What happened while you
So
were
what
gone?
happened when I left, I didn't do the list. The place went back into chaos.
So for now, Dave Muniz will keep making his schedule. And if somebody doesn't like it, well, he can just...
Let it be, let it be.
Esta Kongstel, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our foreman today was executive producer Sarah Cutler. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Samantha Lawton. Special thanks to our assistant producer Ilan Ireland.
Director Esta Kongstil coordinated our studio production with Lindsay Chu and Jiayu Liang. Thanks to our producers Bianca Alvarez and Liz Foster.
Our web editor Isaac Hulat got his stream live to the web. Churchill Donwy and Daniel Shaler produced the news. Senior editor Alyssa Castles and assistant editor Julie Goldenberg led our copy team.
Our instructors, Dan Bobkoff and Lydia McMullen-Laird, advised our staff. I'm Aram Salam.
And I'm Babette Stolk. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.